For Creamer Media's Polity, I am Shannon de Ryhove. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss non-violence as the foundation for dialogue and peace in South Africa. Welcome, Raymond.
Thank you.
Now, you refer to Nelson Mandela describing the difference between his approach to violence and that of Chief Albert Luthuli as being that Luthuli saw non-violence as a principle, but that Nelson Mandela saw it as a tactic. Can you explain that?
Yes, it's interesting that as far as I know, no one is actually talking about this. And why I think people are not talking about this is that we have never really entrenched the principle of non-violence in South Africa. And I am also one of those who's to blame for this. Now, when Mandela said that, there was something true about the fact that the ANC and other organizations had to choose between different ways of prosecuting the struggle, one of which was non-violence. But I think if you look at the evolution of Mandela's life, you can see that ultimately the way he conducts himself is in fact to elevate the status of peace. But from early on, Mandela did have a more, I would say, almost reckless attitude to violence, or a higher tolerance of the use of force than Luthuli and many others, partly the way he grew up as a young man, the type of warrior masculinity that he grew up with, but also he was a boxer, and he, in the 1950s, he was the leader. He was made volunteer-in-chief in the Defiance Campaign. Now, the Defiance Campaign was a strictly non-violent campaign, and they had to swear to act in a particular way with discipline, etc. But you cannot see in Nelson Mandela's writings very much about non-violence as being a good thing. And in this regard, Mandela is different from Gandhi, Martin Luther King and the others. Also in the 50s, before the ANC had decided on armed struggle, Mandela made various unmandated statements. You know, in Sophiatown, you can remove us over our dead bodies, or before they decided on the formation of MK, he said the chapter of non-violence has been closed. And he was reprimanded about that. And even in later life, Mandela, when you reflect, he had to apologize, but he says that he was right, you see. But so I think there's a difference in his background compared with that of many others. Luthuli did not elaborate the principle of non-violence to the same extent as Martin Luther King and Gandhi did, and they didn't. He, I think, regarded the apartheid regime as being at war with the majority of the people. So implicit in his thinking was he didn't want war to be prosecuted from the other side as well, and just have everything ended in bloodshed. So he didn't articulate the principle of non-violence in the same way as people like Martin Luther King and others, but he was much more committed to it, it seems, than Mandela. However, when Mandela initiated the talks, he had gone to war, but he saw the possibility of ending the bloodshed. I think he could have waited, and it may have been that there would have been more losses on the side of the SADF. We don't know. But I think he made a decision then in his mind that peace was a value that would be the basis for a democratic future. So Mandela himself seems to have evolved, and that difference between Luthuli and Mandela, the way they phrased it, or the way Mandela phrased it, the differences seem to narrow over time. Also, Luthuli, in my understanding, did reluctantly support armed struggle as well.
Now, if non-violence is an important principle, how do we instill it in South African society?
Yeah, it's interesting. In South Africa, you don't actually have, you've never had a peace movement in the same way as you had around the time of the war. I think there was a peace movement then, and there were former soldiers and so forth. And consequently, none of us have grown up celebrating peace. And I think we don't have to necessarily adopt the formulations of Gandhi and Martin Luther King in order to celebrate peace. For example, I am not comfortable with the association of non-violence with purification, sort of as a particularly virtuous practice that will cleanse me and so forth like that. Now, some of that type of discourse can be found in Gandhi, and it can be found in Martin Luther King. At the same time, I do think we need to explore what Martin Luther King calls the love ethic. And what I think, the way I would want to explore it is within the notion of what people like Paulo Freire and Cornel West and a number of others, Martin Buber, referred to as a dialogic approach, that the only way that you can have democracy is if we have a situation which is conducive to dialogue between human beings. Because if you hit someone or if you shoot someone, what you're really doing is you don't even know in war who you're shooting. You're actually treating them in the same way as you would treat a target or something. The human qualities are extinguished. Now, in a dialogic approach, what you're really saying is what the other person has to say is important. It is important that we entrench non-violence so that we can build democracy as a process of listening. Now, what is a key feature of some of the most famous leaders in this country, like Mandela, Sisulu, Luthuli, Tambo, Kotane? You will hear about all of them that they would be asked for advice and they would listen. When Mandela was a lawyer, the late Ruth Mompate, working office, would say he would stay and listen for hours and hours. Now, I remember this from when I was working with, but I didn't actually formulate it that way at the time. Kotane, Sisulu especially. I remember two of us going to see Sisulu, and his head would be going like this from one to the other, because he was listening. Now, Sisulu was famous, and he was aware of the weight that his words carried and the responsibility. Luthuli, Sisulu, Mandela, Tambo of them understood that someone was going to act on the basis of the advice that he gave. Chris Hani, Joe Slover as well, both of them, all of them understood if someone was going to risk themselves, if someone was going to take some action that could have an effect on the struggle and on the person's life, they had to listen very carefully. So this notion of dialogue, sometimes it is an unequal dialogue in the sense that the one person is seeking advice from the other. But the fact that the person listens so carefully is interesting in the sense that it shows you that they valued you, even though you were their leader. I mean, I can remember in 1974, when I went to London, I went to report to some of the leaders, and they were sitting there taking notes from what I was saying, like university students. And what it made me realize, or think then, as a young man, is that these people placed weight on what I said. And I think what we've got to instill in South African people, and maybe we must start thinking of building a peace movement, because any country that has Marikana massacres, any country where just about every demonstration ends in bloodshed, or where you've got police shooting their girlfriends, their wives, or you've got ordinary people. I mean, the amount of shooting in South Africa is unbelievable. Now, when you've got this, maybe we need a peace movement to build this principle of non-violence. I don't know how to say about it, but I do believe that we have never really worked out the rationale for non-violence, and it's time that we did.
So it's a case of acknowledging people's humanness.
Yes, because if you kill someone, you're really saying we can dispense with you. This world can carry on very well with you 6 feet under.
Well, thank you very much for your insight, Raymond.
Thank you.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about non-violence as the foundation for dialogue and peace in South Africa.